I want to hook into what you're saying about what is the meaning of church? What is the meaning of this thing or that thing?
Yeah.
And then we attend to the world,
Yeah.
and we're attending in particular to social practices.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to describe what a social practice is, why it's helpful to describe social practices to get at things like sacred values, norms and authorities, and maybe even begin sussing out how this came into play with your community organizing,
Yeah.
and any case studies you want to share?
Yeah, that's really helpful. So we'll begin on the sort of heady part and maybe get to the practical part. I mean, this fits really well with the social pragmatism, right? Because this, one way to think about this is, how does the world work? And the world works by, one way in which we can talk about individuals making sense of the world around them is through social practices and social practical reasoning. So individuals are reasoners. We make judgments about the world and the others in it, and they make judgments about ourselves too. And so we hold ourselves accountable to those judgments, and we take each other seriously as adequate sources of authority within the world. If you say you're going to do something, I'm going to hold you accountable to it. Like, all right, do it. And this is. But that's a sort of explicit part of it. I think a lot of times what happens in the social pragmatism is this just happens without people actually talking about it, without actually, it's just, oh, okay, well, this is how we communicate. This is how we get by in the world. This is just how self-consciousness works itself out within the world, is that we're able to make judgments about ourselves and each other and the things in the world, and that is a social process. So norms and shared values they're socially established, which means they're grounded in shared assumptions, shared values, shared attitudes and expectations about the world. And so we are social creatures, right? Everything is deeply relational in this way. And this then means, too, that this scales up, too. So when we think about institutions, then even in terms of, one way to think about this is in terms of gender or social identities, they are practices. There's ways of acting like a man that are shared, that are established and that are authoritative, normative, right? And sometimes not always good. This is the power then of language like toxic masculinity, or things like racial practices, so that we can have other understandings of this is what it means to practice whiteness, and how then whiteness gets established and is normative in our world, is like water in that way. Well, this doesn't mean that this account then of how it is that individuals work in the world and reason in the world, through shared practices, social practices of reasoning. It's consistent. It is an activity, right? It doesn't mean that things need be the way that they are. There are counter practices, counter cultures. We can judge certain practices, even within our own Christian tradition, as racist or misogynistic by alternative norms. This is not a way just to make sense of the world as an argument for the status quo. Instead, you can do radical, if things are shared in the practice, then it kind of frees you to actually make radical critiques about how things are, and then from that be constructive of where things ought to go. And so this is part of the freedom then, this is the process then of community organizing. Because, I've got 2 kids. I care a lot about daycare and about the cost of childcare. Because it's really expensive.
It's super expensive.
And it need not be that way. Because I see and know other ways that our society has been structured.
Yep.
And we can change that. How do we change that? Well, you can start by thinking about how it is that you are talking with others about it and finding other ways to do. One way to do it, that's just the real quick example, what the difference is between for-profit childcare versus cooperative childcare. And how it is that like a co-op childcare the way in which the profit and the wages of that business are democratically governed and shared. And so then the way in which that practice within the economy has then shifted to a much more radically democratic way of sharing the profits and running a business. And so just the freedom of seeing things need not be the way that they are. There are alternatives that have been grounded within our faith. Churches have been wonderful sources of co-ops, and particularly of co-op childcares. We can talk about practical, really simple issues. This doesn't need to talk about. We don't need to be in epistemology all day. Let's just talk about how does we live our lives together. And this helps us think about things that are sometimes overwhelming and too big in really practical and down-to-earth ways. Because institutions are collections of social practices, and individuals live in and perpetuate those systems and structures, which means that you can also live counter to it and build power with others to build other institutions, right? This isn't the final thing I'll say here. This is not a short circuit argument. Well, in order to solve climate change, you just need to recycle. No, this is about understanding that systems and structures are extremely powerful within our lives, but it's also not giving a way to a nihilism or an inadequacy about our lives. It's that you can build power, and it starts with understanding at that basic philosophical and theological point.
I really like your near at hand example of childcare.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone with young children, this is a quotidian fact of life.
Yeah.
Of daily, regular commutes, waiting at the gate, signing in, signing out, chatting with other parents while they're waiting for their kid, asking how, this activity went and that. And so there's a sense in which the childcare is a gathering of practices, like discrete practices, but it is itself a kind of social practice.
Amen.
And because of your participation, given your small children, you have been observing things.
Yeah.
You have been attending to the world of childcare.
Yeah.
And through this attendance over time, certain patterns emerge.